The earnings season kicks off in South Africa this week and particularly next week, and everyone will be paying close attention to the resource sector. Amplats is due to report next week. It has already warned about a loss. Of course, that sector plagued by illegal strikes, that's taken their toll on production numbers, and a lot of heat, more heat than light, generated in the debate around Amplats' restructuring announcement. We now have Kobus Nel from Stanlib and Claude Besak from Unimix joining us, and also Peter Major from Cape Town. If I could start with you, Claude, people in South Africa sometimes don't get the perspective that we have from Europe, from the United States, foreign perceptions. What is the perception at the moment? You live here, but you have links to a London company, of the resources sector.
I think lots of concern, a sense that South Africa is losing its place in the world as an economic destination, as an African powerhouse. Somewhat being written off, really, unfortunately, because of the lack of clarity on policy, and for quite some time now, and because of, obviously, incidents like the Marikana incident, and also large concerns with the increasing costs of doing business in South Africa. So overall, not a very pretty picture, and one which is bringing tremendous amount of doubt onto how the country is going to be able to manage its tremendous amount of need for foreign investment.
Especially when you've got companies coming to the fore looking at how best to manage their situations, like that of the case of Anglo American coming through with a structural review of the company. There's backlash that they get from government specifically. A lot of analysts saying that the reaction from government to Amplats restructuring, overblown, irresponsible. Your view?
Yeah, look, it certainly, was a big announcement. As we said, 14,000 people, and you put another 5 people around them, which they got to look after, and then the secondary industry around it. It is a massive impact that it's sort of got. If this kind of announcement would be implemented. But on the other hand, in our deep level mining, it's no different from any other commodity and mining company globally. When you do get into environments where the fundamental economic nature of the economy or its demand pattern does not support a certain amount of capacity in the market, then the market and the overall commodity sort of restructure in terms of its supply, to be able to put it in a position where it can be funded again, where investors is interested to fund that sort of base. And certainly that's what we've seen at Amplats.
Well, let's bring in Peter Major from KD's Corporate Securities joining us in Cape Town. Good morning to you, Peter. We've just started talking about it, and a phrase I used, that the debate between, if it's a debate assumes you listen to the other side. There doesn't seem to be too much of that between government and the mining industry, much more heat than light. An intemperate language, one would expect perhaps disagreement, but not the emotion that's been flying about. We surely need a discussion that pulls back from this kind of mudslinging.
You summed it up. That's exactly what we need. We need a discussion that pulls back from the media hype and is done behind closed doors in a rational, professional manner. And I guess we're doing all the talking, and the real people who matter, they're the ones we don't hear talking enough. But in other words, when they talk, it's more for the media than to each other. In other words, the DMR should be talking with Anglo Platinum, and they should do it with the union there. And they should do it behind closed doors.
Do you see then, Peter, we've got a discussion and conversation happening over the next 90 days. What are your expectations as far as outcomes are concerned there? Do you foresee that cooler heads will prevail and consensus reached in terms of how to tackle fundamental problems that plague our mining industry?
Yes and no. I definitely see cooler heads prevailing, and there will be some kind of resolution and agreement without burning the mine down. But do I see us now going on from that and fixing the elements that got us to this stage? I'm barely 50-50. No, I don't see that being resolved. That's a long process, because we've had the factors that are bringing these mines to closure now under a period of pretty good platinum prices have been entrenching themselves worse and worse for the last 10 or 12 years. I always refer to the 90s. The 90s, in my mind, was a golden era between government, unions, and the mines. If you look at the gold price and the platinum price and inflation, We had cost increases below inflation almost every year in the 90s on most of platinum mines and on all the gold mines, because those 3-4 important bodies were working so well together. It wasn't in the headlines hardly at all. It was never on the TV or the news. Now, they haven't been working together for really 8 years, but we're seeing them all on TV, all in the media, yelling and donoring and fires and violence.
Yeah, well, if I could bring it back to Claude on that, just to follow on that point, there's an irony here, Claude, isn't there? I mean, in the 90s, half of the 90s was not democratic South Africa. There's an irony when the ANC came in, nationalisation was the talk, the commanding heights of the economy, and everyone was relieved when this wasn't pushed, and it's almost gone backwards ideologically, whereas one would have expected it perhaps to go in a different direction, to get better rather than worse. But the mining Indaba is coming up, that big gathering of African investment in mining in Cape Town. This may be an opportunity for statements to calm things.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Peter. I'm in agreement with Peter on most of what has been said. I think the key issue is that there is a lack of fundamental agreement on what we need to do about the mining sector in South Africa and overall about the economy, the role of the state, the role of the private sector, who should be doing what and how, who should be investing in what, who should be getting what out of it. The irony about the 1990s is actually very interesting for me. We're just now putting out a study where we've been studying the mineral and petroleum rent in Africa since 1970 up to 2010. And what we see is that in the 1990s, South Africa was counter-cyclical. There was a mineral commodity bear that lasted about 20 years, and during which time we saw tremendous progress of the mineral rent in South Africa. Now, how that got distributed is a key problem, and I think that's why there is such an antipathy between the mining sector and the ANC and government, because that rent was not allocated properly and it did not benefit the people. Now we are in this opposite situation. While the rest of the world is experiencing or has experienced commodity booms, and we've seen the commodity rent exploding in most of Africa, we're seeing it under pressure in South Africa. We're seeing the share of mining in GDP going down. At the time we should see it going up. And that, again, puts us back to the question why. And really, for me, it's a political economy question. There's a lack of consensus, there's a lack of understanding, and there is a lack of mechanics that allow us to come together with a suitable, sustainable dispensation. We're going to solve this problem undoubtedly about Amplat, but we're going to limp from crisis to crisis, lack of understanding to lack of understanding, and we're going to see this mining sector going further down and further down as a share of GDP, while our other sectors are under pressure. And that's a problem. The Indaba, yes, but every year we have announcements and fairly positive statements by the minister. And it leads to nothing. You know, we've had the minister go on road shows after road shows, announcing that South Africa is open for business. But every year after that, we see ourselves going down in terms of ranking in the key surveys about investment confidence in South Africa. And we see the key indicators going down.
Yeah. Cobus, a little bit more immediate is the Davos gathering that's happening, the World Economic Forum kicking off this week. And of course, we've got a huge delegation of South African delegates making their way there. I mean, where are your confidence levels sitting in terms of just how much reassurance they'd be able to bring to the table on that end? One of the big themes of on that end is de-risking Africa.
Absolutely, you know, I got confident there is some leaders within the sort of leader structure of this country that do understand, you know, the sensitivities we're dealing with, and that we are operating on a global sort of platform, and we gotta remain competitive on the global platform, you know, to sort of ensure longer term sustainability for our mining sector, you know. And I guess, you know, in the shorter term, you know, unfortunately, you know, there, you know, as the commentator said as well, you know, there has been a lack of communication, you know, and, you know, that I think in the end of the day, one really needs for everyone to pull together and understand as one goal, you know, that we gotta remain competitive to be able to attract capital from a global basis, and then to allow it to excel, and then to be able to, you know, sort of operate this industry to everyone's benefit.
From an investment perspective, Cobus, so what's the value our miners are putting on the table right now, you know, looking at those share prices where we're saying it's hard to find value within the market at this stage of the game, but those valuations on the resources side having been beaten down quite aggressively?
Look, I mean, it depends on, you know, what specific commodities you look at. You know, I think some of our deeper level mines, you know, maybe on the gold sector, is certainly expecting a lower gold price, and it's maybe a little bit cautious in terms of delivery of volume, etc., etc. But whereas on the platinum side, I would argue many of these companies have already incorporated a better sort of basket price, metal price environment, you know, where it's already given the shares a bit of a benefit of the doubt with regards to that. So, you know, for an investor today, you know, looking at this, you know, you got to see that there's more structure towards the platform where these companies can operate from. In the absence of that, you most likely will see leakage every single year as a shareholder, as an equity holder. You know, that share of the pie may just shrink and sort of evaporate.
Peter, just to come back to you in Cape Town, Peter Major, looking at Anglo American Platinum and Anglo American itself, perhaps more than coincidence or significance in the names. I mean, Anglo was always seen as the leader, the corporate leader, the visionary Oppenheimers, seeing the future and that kind of thing. I mean, they had their critics as well. As it's happened, we've had Cynthia Carroll, lame duck, on the way out. Mark Cutifani, presumably still clearing his desk at Anglo Gold Ashanti, or not far finishing it. In interregnum at Anglo American, no sense of leadership from there, a sense that possibly a London Anglo American doesn't understand South Africa and the nuances of consultation as much as the old Anglo did. And then, of course, Chris Griffith saying, well, you know, the labour relations law and stock exchange requirements, we couldn't consult. Could Amplats have behaved differently here and got away with less heat from government?
Look, they definitely could have behaved differently, but I think Amplats, maybe negligently, maybe over-exuberantly, gave more than the benefit of the doubt to their company. Look at the tens of billions of rands and capex they put in for the last 12, 15 years. Thought they were overdoing it, that we were worried if anyone was going to bring in overproduction, Amplats was. So it's their money, it's shareholders' money. Now the government benefited by Anglo spending all that money, and the platinum employment went from 50,000 in the mid-'80s up to 200,000. So even today at 150,000 in the platinum industry, it's still 3 times what it was. So sure, maybe in this last year they could have done a little bit different. Maybe they should have negotiated harder 4, 5, 6 years ago. Maybe they should have said, we're going to tie wage increases to productivity or we're going to close the mine. So I think Amplats, Anglo American, they've done more than probably most international mining companies would have. I think they've done as much as any local company would have done. Really, we just have to pray for a higher platinum price, and maybe they don't have to retrench all those 14,000. But you have to plan for a normal platinum price. You can't always plan that platinum will go higher and higher when it's trading almost double its long-term average anyways. Yeah. I think they've tried pretty hard, and I think they owe it to the country and the union to sit down with them and talk professionally behind closed doors and say, how can we minimize the damage and keep these shafts on a basis that if the platinum price goes up, we can put people back to work?
Claude, could the point about Anglo American at a leadership interim at the moment, the parent company, Amplats' new chief executive just come in. The nuance of this, not saying they haven't contributed or that they can avoid retrenching 14,000, but in their dealings with government, could they have done this differently?
They probably could have done it differently. I think there's no doubt about that. I think it's very difficult, in fairness to them, to know who to engage and how to engage at this point. There's tremendous amount of counterproductive and counter purpose communications between the ANC and government. Who leads South Africa today? You know, you talk to the minister and you have an agreement with the minister, but we'll remember when the minister said about nationalisation, not over my dead body, she got shut down by Gwede Mantashe quite violently and publicly. You have a sense that it's very difficult to know who you're going to engage with and to discuss what and to get what approval. And it doesn't help that even if you are, and they are restricted by labour laws, I'm at JSE level. It doesn't help that if you think that you're doing right, you have the ANC making statements that the shaft should be repossessed. You have someone else in the ANC, a policy leader, saying that these mines, not the mineral bodies, but the mines belong to the people, a complete misinterpretation of the law, makes it very difficult to actually, I think, have productive, progressive engagement. You may come to an agreement and an understanding with one ministry, and you fall foul of another ministry or of the leadership of the party itself. There are just too many chiefs and not enough Indians.
Is this the tone for 2013?
Yeah, it's sort of a rough patch to start off, but I guess what we've seen last year playing out, post the Marikana events, always sort of, and I guess the movement and the change we've seen on a unionized basis has always sort of set the year up for some volatility in it. As these structures sort of play out and you see the move of power maybe from a unionized basis, and for those structures to sort of settle down, unfortunately, it may lead to another very volatile year. And I think in the current environment where, we are seeing some improvements, obviously, of growth and some stabilization, many of these companies are still sitting in very vulnerable positions, and it's certainly not a time where our deep-level mines can actually afford this type of behavior playing out, So I think it is a year that unfortunately is loaded with risk for these deep-level underground mines. But let's hope, from a leadership perspective, they will step forward and take control.